Know the Difference with Annex Wealth Management, a segment addressing the sandwich generation. Deanne Phillips here to talk about it. Welcome back, Deanne.
Hi, Danny.
As Director of Client Learning and Development, CFP, CDFA, Certified Divorce Financial Analyst, you work with a wide variety of clients, and I'm sure you see clients who are struggling as part of the sandwich generation. But can you give us a quick explanation of what that is?
Sure. It was a term that was coined originally in the 80s, believe it or not. The sandwich generation is that generation of people typically in their 40s or 50s responsible for bringing up their own children at the same time they're caring for their aging parents or other family members. In other words, they literally are sandwiched between two generations as active caregivers.
And it's not easy duty. The number I've seen is an estimated 9 million sandwich generation caregivers. That is a lot.
Yeah, and about 3 in 10 U.S. adults, just under 30%, have a child younger than 18 at home, and 12% of those parents provide unpaid care for an adult as well. So all told, these are multi-generational caregivers who often provide more than 2.5 hours of unpaid care per day on average, according to the Pew Research Center analysis of the Bureau of Labor Statistics data.
Yeah, and as you point out, this is not a full-time caregiver. It's either like somebody employed at a care center. The sandwich generation caregivers, they need to balance full-time jobs and the rest of their life.
Right. So 2/3 of these caregivers are employed, working about 36 hours per week at their own job and balancing the stress of that. But also, and this is not necessarily a bad thing, Danny, but the amount of time that parents spend actively with their kids these days has gone up considerably now. Moms spend more than 40% more time with their kids than a mom did in the 1960s, and dad quality time has tripled as well. But when you combine this with full-time job and an average of 22 hours per week caring for an elderly parent on top of that, well, that can stretch the caregiver pretty thin.
It's an assumption, maybe it's not fair. Does this fall primarily on women?
Yes. Increasingly, the sandwich generation definition could also include, besides the word female, the word millennial. Since the pandemic, millennial women have begun to fill the ranks, joining Gen Xers and boomers in the sandwich, according to a recent New York Life report. Millennials are 1/3 of all multi-generational caregivers now post-COVID. Part of this is because that generation has delayed parenting well into their 30s, and so now they're actually paying for child care and elder care at the same time, and that puts a financial squeeze on them as well. They still might also be paying student loans, and that millennial generation has a record amount of medical debt on top of it. So this really suggests an added need for financial and retirement planning for those facing those challenges.
You mentioned boomers. This is a crazy stat. They're going to start reaching their 80s in 2026. About 60% of adults 65 and older have at least 2 chronic conditions. That's according to the CDC. More people living with dementia. That's more hands-on care. About 25% of dementia caregivers are also caring for children under the 18. I mean, God bless them.
If they can, it gets to some point where, of course, a child wants to do what's best for their parent, and sometimes physically they just aren't able to meet the needs too.
It's easy to feel guilty about that when you're torn between those, because torn between those two worlds, because you feel a responsibility to your parent, but you've got the rest of your life as well.
Well, you do, but you also, sometimes it's, for me, my mom was not a large woman, but just lifting her and dealing with that, I was afraid of hurting her.
Right.
So it became that challenge. And this can absolutely lead to levels of added stress for these individuals. More women than men leave the workforce to care for their loved ones as well, as we both know, Danny. It's little wonder that a recent Transamerica Center for Retirement Studies report found 1/3 of women surveyed said they're just getting by to cover basic living expenses. However, many haven't seen their retirement savings and income placed into a financial plan. They haven't been able to adequately visualize that future. This is an important step, as we know here at Annex, seeing the plan and what you can do now to make sure your financial and, your personal goals are also met in the future.
So what needs to happen with a conversation with loved ones in your family who will need a plan for diminished capacity? And really, it should be sooner than later.
Well, absolutely. This is why we have attorneys on staff at Annex. Now, we're not a law firm. We don't draft documents, but we certainly use their expertise to review current estate plans, advise based on new circumstances like caring for a loved one, and making sure that they're taken care of in the future.
Deanne Phillips, Director of Client Learning and Development, CFP, CDFA. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.